ground control to Major Tom. Take your protein pills and put your helmet on.
As the giant Saturn V rocket rose through the sunlight from Cape Canaveral in July 1969, taking Neil Armstrong to the moon, a group of scientists led by Wernher von Braun were filled with pride. Their team had built the world's largest rocket for the Apollo mission. Aviation doctors, led by Dr. Hubertus Struckold, had built delicate equipment that protected Armstrong and his crew against the violent acceleration, lack of oxygen, and the eerie weightlessness of outer space. These groups of scientists confirmed the supremacy of German science. 25 years after World War II, America was reaping the benefits of its former enemy's genius. By the beginning of World War II, Germany had technologically far surpassed any other nation at the time.
Assume that Americans thought that these doctors, while some of them had done horrendous things, had a useful knowledge base. I mean, they were medical doctors trained in what was considered, for most of the 20th century, one of the finest places to learn to be a medical doctor in the world, Germany. Germany had many of the best scientists, many Nobel Prize winners in many different fields.
The Germans were the first to invent radar, jet engines, pressurized cabins, assault rifles, and V-2 rockets. World War II was the biggest war fought in human history. It saw the death of millions of soldiers and civilians. By its end, it crippled Germany and its allies, and caused the European industrial complex to come to a screeching halt. The war saw actors on 6 different continents. 6 years of war had worn down and overspent the economies and morale of each nation. As the war drew to a close, the Allied powers resolved to punish the Nazis. Treaties and tribunals were put in place to bring war criminals to justice. The Nuremberg Charter was put in place in 1945 for the prosecution and punishment of Nazi war criminals.
You expect them to be executed straight away. You can't do that. That is why you also had the Nuremberg trials. You couldn't have rough justice. That would be a violation of responsibilities that you had. You have to have the rule of law before you indict someone and execute them. So that is what happened at a number of trials, not just of the major war criminals, and you've seen photos of the people who were sitting in the dock there, but there was also a trial of the industrialists, there was a trial of the doctors, and a number of other people, some of whom were executed subsequently because their crimes were so serious that they were condemned to death.
So at the Nuremberg trials, there was, of course, the desire to try the arch criminals, but mainly to educate ordinary Germans about what their country had done. And so films were made, broadcasts were done from Nuremberg to try to acquaint Germans with the enormities of their nation's crimes.
These trials worked for some time, but pretty soon Soviet, American, and English intelligence agencies began scouring occupied Germany for military and scientific assets. The special units were sent into Germany to capture enemy scientific equipment, aircraft designs, and drugs. The main priority of these agencies was to capture the brilliant Nazi scientists, the ingenious minds behind the formidable Nazi war machine. After rounding up these scientists, the United States military brought them back to America. The US had originally intended merely to debrief them and send them back to Germany. However, when the War Department realized the scope of the scientists' knowledge and expertise, they decided it would be disastrous to send the scientists back home. Following the discovery of new Nazi weapons, the War Department was committed to keeping German scientists in America to prevent their capture by Russian forces.
It was very clear, especially as the years passed after World War II, that America had a new enemy in the form of the Soviet Union.
The CIA's plan to incorporate Nazi technical experts into the United States scientific community was brilliant. However, there was just one problem. It was illegal. The Nuremberg Charter, signed by all the Allied powers, required all Nazi war criminals to be put up for trial. The CIA decided to sidestep the agreement by hatching a plan called Operation Paperclip. The background investigations done by the War Department's Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency found incriminating evidence that many of the scientists were ardent Nazis. The director of the Joint Intelligence Agency, Bosquet Lev, was worried that if this information was released, these scientists would never receive American visas. He believed that by endorsing the Paperclip program, they were accepting the lesser of two evils. That if America didn't recruit these scientists, the Soviet communists surely would. He had the scientists' dossiers rewritten and cleansed of any Nazi references. By 1955, more than 760 German scientists had been granted U.S. citizenship and integrated into the American scientific community. Many had been longtime members of the Nazi Party, had conducted human experiments at concentration camps, used slave labor, and committed other war crimes. After winning World War II, the Allied powers took the liberty to seize German machinery and intellectual property. It was within their rights to do so. As the old adage goes, to the victors belong the spoils. The question is raised about the responsibility of the Allied nations towards their adversary. Did the Allies fail to capture and punish many of the Nazi war criminals? Was Operation Paperclip counter to American ideals? When, for a nation, should the end justify the means?
At the beginning of the Cold War, there was the competition between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union, and therefore they took, on the one hand, also intellectual rights, for example, intellectual reparations, as you may have seen in the books that you've read, which they also had the right as an occupying power to take. So they took some machinery and some physical reparations, and then also some intellectual patents, for example. But then finally they also took the people. In the case of the Americans and the Brits, they decided to persuade these people to bring them over and not to sort of put them in the dock. In Russia, the Russians were partly compelling these scientists whom they had caught to go to the Soviet Union. And
exhausted by war, elated by victory, apprehensive about the future, officers and government officials were often confused, torn between their humanity and determination to achieve their nation's goals. The brewing Cold War demanded recruiting scientists from Germany in order to compete with the USSR. Times were tough. Still, America aimed for the moon.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
As new facts emerge and history is clarified, by endorsing Operation Paperclip, the Americans prevented the recruitment of German scientists by the Soviet Union. Stealth jets, cruise missiles, and the Apollo missions were born. Space, the final frontier, was conquered, and the Cold War was won. And it was all thanks to Operation Paperclip.